My grandson stole my ring to propose, so I crashed the wedding and took it back on stage. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but mine was served burning hot at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, right in the middle of my grandson's wedding ceremony. When I walked down that aisle with fire in my eyes and reclaimed my grandmother's ring from his bride's trembling finger, the silence wasn't just deafening, it was justice incarnate. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how the boy I loved like my own son thought he could steal $127,000 worth of my soul and get away with it. I'm Maya Johnson, 73 years old, and I spent 45 years as a registered nurse, 45 years of seeing the best and worst of humanity laid bare. I've held dying hands, confronted lying relatives, and fought tooth and nail for patients who couldn't fight for themselves, which is why my blood runs cold when I think about how I should have recognized the predator living in my own home, wearing my grandson's face. Marcus had always been my golden child, the light of my life after darkness consumed our family. When that drunk driver tore his parents from this world 5 years ago, I didn't just become his guardian, I became his everything. Every dollar of his college tuition, every month of his rent, every mile on his car, I paid for it all with a grandmother's boundless love. I thought I was raising a man of honor, a man who would carry our family's legacy forward. Instead, I was nurturing a snake who would strike at the very heart that sheltered him. The discovery came like a physical blow to my chest. I was searching for my pearl earrings for Sunday service when I opened my jewelry box and felt the world tilt beneath my feet. My grandmother's ring was gone, that breathtaking 1920s Art Deco masterpiece with its 2-carat diamond surrounded by sapphires like tears of joy. 4 generations of Johnson women had worn that ring, each one passing down not just jewelry, but a legacy of love, strength, and unbreakable bonds. The matching necklace had vanished too, along with pieces that held my mother's memory, my history, my very identity. I sat on my bed, staring at those empty velvet compartments like graves, feeling something die inside me. This wasn't a random burglary. Every other valuable in my home sat untouched. Only someone who knew me intimately, someone who had studied my habits and exploited my trust, could have executed such a surgical theft. Someone who knew exactly where I kept the treasures of my heart. Someone I would have died to protect. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer to the soul. Marcus had been here just 3 days ago, insisting with such loving concern that I rest while he organized things for me. I'd been so grateful for his help, so touched by his devotion, never suspecting that behind those caring eyes was a predator cataloging my vulnerabilities, planning his betrayal with the precision of a surgeon and the heart of a thief. Chapter 2. The Knife Twist of Betrayal. I called Marcus immediately, my nursing training the only thing keeping my voice steady as rage built like a volcano in my chest. Marcus, honey, I need to ask you something that's breaking my heart. Have you seen my grandmother's ring? It's missing from my jewelry box, and I'm terrified something's happened to it. The pause that followed lasted an eternity, long enough for me to hear the death of every beautiful memory we'd shared. When he finally spoke, his voice carried that calculated tone I'd learned to recognize in 45 years of dealing with guilt-ridden patients and their lying families. Ring? What ring, Grandma Maya? You have so many pieces of jewelry. Maybe you're just confused. The casual dismissal felt like a slap across my face. The Art Deco ring with the diamond and sapphires, Marcus. The one I've shown you dozens of times. The one I cradled in my hands while telling you stories about your great-great-grandmother. The one I promised would be yours when you found true love. I paused, letting the weight of that broken promise settle between us. It's worth about $40,000, Marcus, along with the matching necklace and several other pieces that seem to have vanished like ghosts. Grandma, you're being paranoid. Maybe you moved them somewhere safer and just forgot. You know how you've been lately with your memory. It's not what it used to be. Those words hit me like poison arrows, each one designed to wound and weaken. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that the boy I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for was not just a thief. He was a psychological terrorist, trying to convince me that my own mind was the enemy. He'd forgotten one crucial fact about me. I'd spent decades navigating hospital politics, dealing with manipulative patients and their scheming families. I could smell deception from across a crowded emergency room. My memory is crystal clear, Marcus. sharp as a scalpel and twice as deadly when someone tries to use it against me. I'm giving you one chance, one final opportunity to tell me the truth and return what you've stolen. We can handle this as family if you show me the respect I deserve right now." "I don't know what you're talking about, Grandma. Maybe you should see Dr. Peterson about this paranoia. It's really concerning at your age." The line went dead. He'd hung up on me, the boy I loved like my own son, the child I'd held through nightmares and celebrated through triumphs. But Marcus had made a fatal error in judgment. He'd underestimated the woman who'd fought insurance companies and hospital administrators, who'd saved more lives than she could count, who'd built a comfortable retirement through sheer determination and razor-sharp intelligence. The war had begun, and he'd just declared it on the wrong warrior. The next morning, I drove to my bank with the focused determination of a woman who'd spent her life fighting for justice. I requested copies of all my account statements for the past 6 months, along with documentation of every safe deposit box visit. What I found didn't just confirm my worst fears, it revealed a betrayal so systematic, so calculated, that it took my breath away. 3 weeks ago, Marcus had accompanied me to the bank when I'd mentioned updating my will. He'd waited in the lobby like a patient predator while I accessed my safe deposit box. But I realized now he'd been watching, learning, planning. The bank's security cameras had recorded everything, including him memorizing my box number with the cold precision of a professional thief. I spread the financial documents across my dining room table like a general preparing for the battle of her life. There were unauthorized withdrawals from my savings account, small amounts designed to fly under my radar, but they added up to over $15,000 in the past 4 months. The timing coincided perfectly with Marcus's increased visits and his sudden ability to afford luxuries that should have been impossible on a graduate student's budget. Then I found the smoking gun that made my hands shake with rage. A credit card statement showing a $3,200 purchase at Tiffany & Co. 3 days after my jewelry disappeared. Marcus had opened a new credit card using my address as a reference, something I learned about when the welcome packet arrived in my mail. At the time, I'd assumed it was an innocent mistake and thrown it away. Now I realized it was part of a master plan that had been months in the making. I photographed everything with my phone, a skill my grandniece had taught me, though she'd never imagined I'd use it to document a family member's crimes. Each piece of evidence was meticulously organized and dated, building a case that would be absolutely impossible to refute. The hardest part wasn't just accepting the theft, it was realizing that this represented a systematic campaign of psychological warfare. Marcus had been studying my routines, my finances, my deepest vulnerabilities for months. He'd turned my unconditional love into a weapon against me, using my trust as a roadmap to my destruction. But he'd forgotten that I'd spent my career building ironclad cases, documenting every detail for insurance companies and lawyers. When patients' families tried to blame hospitals for their loved ones' suffering, I knew how to construct evidence that would stand up in any court in America. Patricia Williams answered on the first ring, her voice carrying the same strength that had made her legendary in courtrooms across the city. 20 years ago, she'd been a scrappy public defender, fighting for the powerless. Now, she ran the most respected elder law practice in the state. "Maya, I'm so deeply sorry this is happening to you," she said, after reviewing my meticulously documented evidence. "But your documentation is absolutely flawless. Most victims don't have even a tenth of this proof." "Documentation was my religion as a nurse," I replied, spreading the photographs across her mahogany conference table like battle plans. "Every detail matters when someone's life is on the line. What's our next move?" "We need more evidence before we can involve the police effectively." She handed me a business card with the reverence of someone passing along a sacred weapon. "Janet Rodriguez. She's the finest financial crimes investigator in the city. She specializes in cases where family members prey on the elderly, and she's never lost a case that matters." Janet's office felt like a war room designed by someone who understood that justice required both strategy and righteous fury. Charts, photographs, and case files covered every surface, each one representing a battle won against those who prey on the vulnerable. She was a compact woman with laser-sharp eyes that reminded me of the toughest ER nurses I'd ever known, the ones who would walk through hell to save a patient. Your grandson is either incredibly stupid or dangerously arrogant, Janet said, with the bluntness of someone who'd seen too many families destroyed by greed. Probably both. That makes him easier to catch, but family cases get ugly in ways that will test your soul. Are you prepared to destroy this relationship permanently? I thought about his voice on the phone, trying to convince me that my own mind was failing, attempting to gaslight me into believing I was losing my sanity. He destroyed it first when he decided to treat me like a confused old woman instead of the fierce warrior who raised him. I'm seeing this through to the bitter end. Good, because what I found will both vindicate you and break your heart. Janet pulled out a thick folder with the solemnity of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. He's been planning the systematic theft for almost 2 years. Bank records show he's been photographing your financial documents during visits, studying your habits, building a complete profile of your assets. He's also been telling friends and acquaintances that you're developing dementia, laying the groundwork to challenge your mental competency if you ever caught him. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty, designed not just to rob me of money, but to destroy my confidence in my own mind. How much has he stolen in total? Conservative estimate? $127,000. But Maya, this isn't just theft. It's psychological warfare designed to make you question your own sanity. He's been systematically undermining your sense of reality while robbing you blind. Janet's plan was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness. We're going to give him exactly what he wants, access to even more of your assets, but this time we'll be watching every single move he makes. Hidden cameras went into my house, positioned with the precision of a military operation. We created a fake will document suggesting I'd leave Marcus everything, placed strategically where he'd find it during his next visit. Act vulnerable, Janet instructed, with the intensity of a coach preparing an athlete for the Olympics. Let him think his psychological manipulation is working perfectly. When Marcus arrived for his weekly visit, I forced myself to play the confused, vulnerable grandmother he desperately wanted me to be. It nearly killed me to see the satisfaction in his eyes when I said, "You know what, honey? You're absolutely right about the jewelry. I've been forgetting things lately. Maybe I did move those pieces somewhere safer and just can't remember." His face didn't just light up, it practically glowed with triumph. Not relief that I was okay, not comfort that we'd resolved a misunderstanding, but pure, unadulterated satisfaction that his manipulation was succeeding. He was pleased that he'd convinced me to doubt my own sanity. "Don't worry, Grandma Maya," he said, wrapping his arm around me with the false tenderness of a predator comforting his prey. "Maybe we should organize all your important papers together. I'd hate for you to lose track of anything else that's valuable." There it was, the escalation Janet had predicted with surgical precision. He wasn't content with the jewelry he'd already stolen. He wanted access to my investment accounts, my property deeds, my entire life savings. He wanted to strip me of everything I'd worked for over 7 decades. "That's such a thoughtful idea, dear. Maybe we could do that next week?" "Perfect! I'll bring my laptop so we can scan everything into the cloud for safekeeping." The word safekeeping dripped from his lips like honey laced with poison. After he left, I sat in my kitchen shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like molten steel in my veins. I'd watched him slip effortlessly into the role of concerned grandson protecting his confused grandmother, and every word had been calculated manipulation designed to destroy my trust in my own mind. The hidden cameras had captured everything with crystal clarity. Marcus checking my mail when he thought I wasn't looking, photographing financial documents with the efficiency of a professional spy, even testing the locked drawer where I kept my most important papers. He'd spent the entire visit gathering intelligence for his next assault on my life savings. "He's planning something massive," Janet confirmed grimly after reviewing the footage. "But Maya, we have him dead to rights now. The question is, how do you want this war to end?" Marcus brought his fiancée Sarah to meet me 2 weeks later, and seeing her nearly shattered what remained of my heart. She was radiant, mid-20s, glowing with the kind of happiness that only comes from believing you've found true love. And there, sparkling on her finger like a mockery of everything sacred in my family, was my grandmother's ring. the ring that represented 4 generations of Johnson women, each one passing down not just jewelry but a legacy of love, strength, and unbreakable bonds. "Mrs. Johnson, Marcus is absolutely amazing," Sarah gushed, her eyes shining with the kind of adoration I'd once felt for the boy I thought I'd raised. "You've raised such a wonderful, caring man. I feel so lucky to have found him." I wanted to scream, to grab her by the shoulders and shake her, until she understood that she was about to marry a master manipulator who would destroy her life the same way he'd tried to destroy mine. But young love is not just blind. It's deaf to warnings and immune to logic. "Tell me about the ring, dear," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. "Oh, Marcus completely surprised me." She held up her hand, admiring the stolen treasure that adorned her finger. "He said he'd been saving for months, working extra jobs to afford something this beautiful. Isn't it gorgeous? He told me it was vintage from the 1920s. "It is indeed." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, not just for myself, but for this innocent young woman who was wearing stolen goods while planning to pledge her life to a man who would betray her as easily as he'd betrayed me. Marcus watched me carefully throughout the visit, his eyes searching my face for any sign of recognition or confrontation. When I simply smiled and played the role of doting grandmother, he visibly relaxed. The arrogant fool actually thought he'd won, that he'd successfully gaslighted me into accepting his version of reality. "We're getting married next month at the Botanical Gardens," Sarah announced, with the joy of someone who believed she was about to begin the happiest chapter of her life. "I really hope you'll come, Mrs. Johnson. It would mean so much to have Marcus's family there." "I wouldn't miss it for the world, dear," I replied, and the truth of those words rang like a bell in my chest. I would indeed be there, but not as the confused old woman Marcus expected. I would be there as an avenging angel, ready to expose his crimes and save this innocent girl from the biggest mistake of her life. That night, I called Janet with the wedding details, my voice filled with the kind of determination that had carried me through 45 years of fighting for my patients. "Perfect," she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "By then, we'll have our complete case assembled. Maya, it's time to discuss how this ends. We could pursue criminal charges quietly, file civil suits, or—" She paused dramatically. "We could choose public justice." "What exactly does that mean?" "We confront him publicly at the wedding, expose his crimes to everyone who matters to him, and recover your property simultaneously. It's riskier legally, but it sends a message that elderly people will fight back with everything they have. It might also save Sarah from walking into the nightmare of her life." I thought about Sarah's trusting face, about other potential victims he might target, about all the elderly people who suffer in silence because they're too ashamed or too broken to fight back. I want public justice, but I want everything documented and completely legal. Then I have the perfect plan, and it's going to be absolutely beautiful to watch. Patricia and Janet presented their strategy with the precision of generals planning the most important battle of the war. They offered 3 options: quiet criminal prosecution, civil lawsuit, or what they called public justice, confronting Marcus at the wedding while simultaneously recovering my property and exposing his crimes to everyone who mattered to him. "It's riskier from a legal standpoint," Janet explained, her eyes gleaming with the anticipation of a warrior about to enter battle. "But it protects other potential victims. It might save Sarah from a marriage that would destroy her life, and it sends a message that will echo through every nursing home and senior center in America. Elderly people fight back." "I want option 3, I declared without hesitation, but everything must be documented, legal, and absolutely devastating." Janet's grin was fierce and beautiful. "Perfect! We'll attend as invited guests with law enforcement backup standing by. When the officiant asks if anyone has objections, you'll present your case to every person in that audience, with cameras rolling and evidence packets for every single witness." The morning of the wedding, I dressed like the formidable woman I'd always been, my finest navy suit, my mother's pearls, and a strength that radiated from every pore. If I was going to confront the grandson who'd betrayed me, I would look every inch the warrior I'd always been. Janet, Patricia, and Detective Martinez arrived at my house at 10 a.m. sharp. We'd briefed him completely on the case. He had arrest warrants ready and a team of officers positioned around the venue. "Remember, stick to the facts." Patricia coached with the intensity of someone who understood that this moment would define everything. You want to sound credible and powerful, not emotional. I've been preparing for this confrontation for 2 months, I replied, my voice steady as steel. I know exactly what I'm going to say, and every word will be the truth. The botanical gardens looked like something from a fairy tale, decorated in white roses and baby's breath. About 50 guests were in attendance, mostly young friends and colleagues who knew me only as Marcus's beloved grandmother, the woman who'd sacrificed everything for his success. The documentary film crew Janet had arranged was positioned discreetly, posing as wedding videographers hired by the happy couple. Sarah looked absolutely radiant in her wedding dress, my grandmother's ring catching the afternoon sunlight like a beacon of stolen beauty. Marcus stood at the altar in his rented tuxedo, waving cheerfully when he spotted me in the audience. The arrogant fool had no idea that he'd just waved at the architect of his own destruction. When Reverend Thompson reached those traditional words about objections, I rose slowly from my seat, my movement as deliberate and powerful as a queen ascending her throne. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, my voice carrying across the garden with the authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding attention in hospital corridors, but I absolutely do have an objection. The silence that followed was deafening, electric with the tension of a moment that would change everything. Marcus's face went white, then red, then white again as the reality of his situation began to dawn on him. "Grandma Maya, what are you doing?" he stammered, his carefully constructed facade cracking like cheap paint. "This isn't the time or place for—" "This is exactly the time and place," I interrupted, my nursing authority taking complete control of the situation. "Before Sarah commits her life to you, she deserves to know exactly who she's marrying. Before these witnesses celebrate your union, they deserve to know the truth about your character." I pulled out the evidence folders Janet and I had prepared, each one containing documented proof of his crimes. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Maya Johnson, Marcus's grandmother. I raised him from the age of 23 when his parents died. I loved him, supported him, and trusted him with my life. 3 months ago, I discovered that he had systematically stolen family heirlooms worth over $40,000 from my home. When I confronted him about this theft, he attempted to convince me that I was losing my memory." The wedding guests sat in stunned silence as Janet moved through the crowd, distributing evidence packets to each person present. The cameras captured every moment, every expression of shock and disbelief. "My memory is absolutely perfect," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, which is why I remember every detail of how Marcus systematically stole from me, sold my mother's jewelry, and used the proceeds to fund his purchases, including that engagement ring. I turned to Sarah, who was staring at me with growing horror, her face pale as her wedding dress. "Sarah, dear, that ring on your finger belonged to my grandmother. Marcus didn't save months to buy it. He stole it directly from my jewelry box 3 months ago. I have surveillance footage, bank records, and pawn shop receipts proving that he funded his entire proposal by selling my family's most precious heirlooms." Sarah looked down at the ring, then back at me, her eyes filling with tears as the truth crashed over her like a wave. "That's not possible. Marcus saved for months. He showed me the receipts." "The receipts are real, sweetheart, but the money came from selling my stolen property." I held up the documented evidence. "He's been lying to both of us." Detective Martinez stepped forward, his badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Marcus Johnson, you're under arrest for grand theft, credit card fraud, and financial elder abuse." As the handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, Sarah slowly removed my grandmother's ring and placed it in my palm with trembling fingers. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I never would have—" "You were as much a victim as I was, dear," I said gently, closing my fingers around the ring that had finally come home. "You deserve someone who will love you honestly, not someone who builds his entire life on lies and theft." The wedding guests dispersed in shocked silence, many stopping to apologize for not recognizing the signs, for not believing that someone could be so cruel to his own family. The evidence was undeniable. Security footage, financial records, recorded phone calls where Marcus tried to convince me I was losing my mind. Justice had been served, but more than that, a message had been sent. Elderly people will not be silent victims. We will fight back with everything we have, and we will win. The trial that followed was swift and decisive. Patricia's presentation was surgical in its precision and devastating in its completeness. Our documentation was so overwhelming that Marcus's defense attorney could barely mount a coherent argument. They tried the confused elderly woman defense, but our security footage, bank records, and recorded phone calls made that impossible to sustain. Your Honor, Patricia stated with the passion of someone fighting for justice itself, this case represents one of the most cruel forms of elder abuse imaginable. The defendant didn't just steal money and property, he systematically undermined his grandmother's confidence in her own mental faculties. He used her love against her, turned her trust into a weapon, and tried to convince her that her own mind was failing when she discovered his crimes. Marcus received 3 years in prison and full restitution orders. But more important than the legal victory was the media attention our case generated. The story of the grandmother who crashed her grandson's wedding to expose his crimes became a viral sensation, inspiring elderly people across the country to speak up about their own experiences with family financial abuse. With my recovered assets and newfound purpose, I established the Eunice Johnson Foundation, named after my grandmother, whose ring had started this entire journey. The foundation provides legal aid, emotional support, and practical resources to elderly people who've been victimized by family members. Patricia joined our board of directors, Detective Martinez became our law enforcement advisor, and we began creating educational programs that would prevent other families from experiencing our pain. Maya, you've transformed your worst nightmare into something that's helping hundreds of people, Patricia observed as we reviewed our first year's impact. We'd recovered over $2 million in stolen assets for victims and had reached thousands of elderly people through our educational programs. The most rewarding moment came when Sarah contacted me 6 months after the wedding disaster. She'd entered therapy to process the betrayal and had begun law school, inspired by our legal battle to pursue a career in family law. Mrs. Johnson, you saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life, she said, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. I want to spend my career helping people like us, people who've been betrayed by those they trusted most. I offered her my mother's pearl earrings, the ones I'd been looking for on that fateful morning when I discovered my grandmother's ring was missing. These represent integrity and strength, dear. I think my mother would approve of them going to a young woman who's turning her pain into purpose. Our work expanded far beyond my original expectations. We developed trusted advocate training for family members who wanted to help their elderly relatives protect their assets without being patronizing. We created partnerships with banks to implement transaction monitoring systems. We established survivor mentorship programs, pairing experienced victims with newly affected elderly people. The foundation became a beacon of hope for elderly people across the country, proving that age brings wisdom and strength, not weakness and vulnerability. 2 years into his prison sentence, Marcus wrote me a letter, his first communication since his arrest. I stared at that envelope for an entire day, debating whether to read it or throw it away. Finally, curiosity and perhaps a lingering hope for redemption won out. Dear Grandma Maya, it began, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not writing to ask for it. I want you to know that I finally understand the full scope of what I did to you. Prison has stripped away all my excuses and forced me to confront the monster I became. The letter continued for several pages, detailing his psychological journey from entitled college student to manipulative thief. He'd started with small amounts, always telling himself that he deserved my money because I was going to leave it to him anyway. When I didn't immediately confront him, he'd escalated, always finding new ways to justify his actions. The worst part wasn't the stealing, he wrote with brutal honesty. It was how I systematically tried to destroy your confidence in your own mind. I turned you into a stereotype, a confused old woman, so I could justify robbing you blind. I actually started believing my own lies about your mental state because it made the theft easier to live with. He described the psychological counseling he'd received in prison, where he'd been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. The diagnosis explained his sense of entitlement and his ability to manipulate people who loved him, but it didn't excuse what he'd done. "I don't expect you to forgive me," the letter concluded. "I just wanted you to know that I see clearly now what I did, and I understand that I destroyed the most precious relationship in my life. You deserve so much better from the grandson you raised with such love and sacrifice." I read that letter 3 times, searching for signs of continued manipulation, but something about it felt different from his previous communications. Raw, honest, and genuinely remorseful. Still, trust once shattered so completely couldn't be rebuilt with words alone. 3 more letters followed over the next 18 months, each one showing deeper insight into his behavior and its impact. When he was finally released on parole, he requested a supervised meeting at Patricia's law office. As I write this final chapter, I'm 78 years old, 5 years older than when I discovered Marcus's devastating betrayal, and infinitely stronger than the woman who once doubted her own perceptions. The Eunice Johnson Foundation has become a national force for justice, helping thousands of elderly people protect themselves from financial abuse while recovering millions in stolen assets. But more importantly, we've fundamentally changed the conversation about aging and vulnerability in America. The documentary about our story, Fighting Back, A Grandmother's War Against Elder Abuse, has been viewed by millions of people worldwide. It's become a teaching tool in nursing schools, law enforcement academies, and family counseling centers. The film's message is simple but revolutionary. Elderly people are not helpless victims waiting to be rescued. We are warriors, capable of fighting our own battles and winning our own wars. Marcus and I now have a carefully structured relationship built on accountability rather than the blind trust that once made me vulnerable. He works for the foundation as a peer counselor, helping other ex-offenders understand the devastating impact of their crimes. It took 4 years of supervised contact, rigorous therapy, and consistent demonstration of change before I felt comfortable with this arrangement. "I can never undo what I did to you," he told me during one of our recent conversations, "but I can spend the rest of my life trying to prevent other people from making the same choices I made. I can use my experience to help families recognize the warning signs before it's too late." His work with the foundation isn't just about his personal redemption, it's about the unique insight he can offer to families dealing with financial abuse. He understands the psychology of manipulation and entitlement in ways that even trained professionals sometimes miss. His presentations to family groups are powerful because he speaks with the authority of someone who's been on the other side of the equation. Sarah graduated from law school with honors and now works as a prosecutor specializing in elder abuse cases. She's become a fierce advocate for vulnerable seniors, using her own experience to understand the complex emotions that victims face when they've been betrayed by family members. "You didn't just save me from a terrible marriage," she told me at her law school graduation. "You showed me that I could turn my worst experience into my greatest strength. Every case I win, every family I help, it's because of the courage you showed me that day." The ripple effects of our story continue to spread in ways I never imagined. The Maya Johnson Elder Protection Act has passed in 12 states, strengthening penalties for family financial abuse and providing funding for victim services. Our educational programs have reached millions of seniors, teaching them to recognize manipulation tactics and trust their own instincts. But perhaps the most important lesson from my experience is this: your age is not your weakness, it's your strength. Your trust is not naivety, it's a gift that should be treasured, not exploited. Your love is not foolishness, it's the most powerful force in the universe. When someone betrays that trust and love, the failure is entirely theirs, not yours. To every person reading this who has experienced financial abuse, manipulation, or betrayal by someone they trusted, you are not alone in your pain. You are not powerless in your situation, and you are never too old to fight back with everything you have. Your voice matters. Your experience matters. Your justice matters. Stand up. Fight back. You are so much stronger than they think you are. The war against elder abuse continues, but we are winning. One battle, one victim, one family at a time. Join us. Your story matters, and together we are unstoppable.